Hey there fellow creators, Ben here from Cinderblock Studios, and I live in the United States, where rather than the worldwide metric system, we use the Imperial system. But I might be biased here. Which one actually is better for artists? Stick around. So between metric and Imperial, let's have a look at a couple of things that I'm going to highlight today that I feel are affected by those two different systems, specifically for artists. The first being volume, so volumes of liquids, paints, watercolors, things in tubes, things in jars and bottles. Two, the sizes of things like paper in sketchbooks, loose paper, canvas, frames, that kind of thing. And three, the bulk weight of certain things, so things like clay or stone or things you're getting that are heavy. So in terms of volume, here in the US we use fluid ounces rather than milliliters. Fluid ounces could just be the way things are manufactured and packaged and everything like that. But I feel like they do it in such a way that everything is sort of a round number, or at least an easy to remember number. A standard small tube of paint I know is 2 ounces. A large one is 5. A jar from Golden is an 8-ounce jar. Bigger jars, 16s. They also have 32s if you're buying from Golden. Bottle of high flow like this is a 4-ounce. Small jars of ink are usually 1. And then watercolors are somewhere between usually 1/2 ounce and 3/4 ounce. And it's when you start getting into those smaller measurements that fluid ounces are a little bit less convenient. Now when it comes to bulk weights, again, I'm probably on the bias side here because I was just raised in the Imperial system, but honestly I think pounds are probably a little better than kilograms, just because again, they tend to be big round numbers. When I got this little stone of alabaster carving stone a couple of years ago, it was 2 pounds. A lot of my shipments end up being just simple like 5.5 pounds, but of course that depends on whatever the weight is. If you're weighing little jars and things like, oh, that's just a pound or that's just a 1/2 pound, I feel like it's just a little bit easier to wrap your brain around that. But again, I was raised that way, so I'm sure people who are raised in kilograms probably don't think of any different than that. The one thing that is specifically different for pounds is the use of it in terms of paper weight. So 140 pound paper, 300 pound paper. There is an equivalent called grams per meter squared, but it's actually less accurate, and you can find out more about this stuff in my paper weight video. And the last sort of section of the Imperial measurements we're going to focus on for today is canvas and paper sizes. Now, in the metric system, they used sort of the ABC system. We'll talk about that in a minute. Here in the US, though, we look at sort of just base standard sizes. And those base standard sizes are, I don't want to say the most easy thing to remember, but if you've been working with them for a long time, you just know what they are. You know you're going to get a 4x6, a 5x7, a 6x8, a 9x12, or an 8x10, a 9x12, and 11x14. Bulking up further, there's some 12x16s, there's also 16x20. Then we start kicking up sizes more, 18x24, and then it's 28x36 is like the next big canvas size up. And I can just rattle those off the top of my head because they're just base standard sizes like that. And in having these easy to use base measurements as your sizes, you don't have to look at a thing and go, oh wait, okay, let me get a ruler, how big is that? You just know, hey, it's an 18x24, cool. Okay, on to the metric system, and if you're in the world where the metric system is used, I'm sure you're going to laugh at me for everything I'm about to say. First, I want to mention, though, that a lot of the rest of the world seems to think that the US does not use any form of the metric system at all. It may not be our go-to standard, but it is used a lot in a lot of different fields. Medical, industrial applications, any kind of manufacturing almost uses milliliters by default. Just because it's more of a global standard. And there's little things in there too, like a big bottle of Coke, for example. We just know that, oh, that's a 2-liter bottle. It's just in our vernacular, but we don't really think about it as being the metric system that way. Okay, so first, back again to volumes. Now my 2-ounce tube that I mentioned before is 59 milliliters. Like, maybe other companies might bump it up to 60 just for the sake of doing it, but the standard 2-ounce tube becomes 59. The 5-ounce tube becomes 148. Now this is when you start getting smaller, this is where things I think are more designed for the metric system are those small measurements. So the 1 fluid ounce is 30 milliliters. Not bad. That's also a 1 ounce. So 30. The 4 ounce ink bottle here, 118. And I noticed that I actually use, in terms of referencing watercolors and gouache and small tubes, I will think about them in terms of the milliliters rather than the ounces, just because it's an easier thing to wrap my head around, specifically because I know how big a watercolor tube is. So the half ounce of gouache, it becomes 15 milliliters. I actually know, technically through doing some mixed drink stuff, that I know that an ounce is roughly 30 milliliters. Actually, it's, I think, a little bit less. 30 milliliters is actually a little bit less than an ounce if you actually measure it out. So I know that half ounce is 15. I know that 3/4 is roughly 23 or something like that. Then we have a smaller one. This is a 14 milliliter tube, so it's a little bit smaller than that one. I know there's small sample tubes that I think are 10 milliliters. So the smaller sizes I feel actually have a little bit more benefit when you're using metric. Then there's bulk weights, so kilograms, and I'm just going to graze over this because I kind of mentioned it earlier. My brain works in pounds, and because I don't have a fine grasp on a kilogram, that measurement to me is really strange. I imagine somebody looking at pounds probably feels the exact same way. It's just different, and I don't know if it's necessarily better for larger bulk items, but I don't think an artist is super affected by that. I think it's just going to depend on, where you grew up and what your particular country uses. Now, the biggest one I feel for the metric system, and I feel like one of its biggest downfalls, is this paper and canvas system, the ABC system. So, like, oh, that's A4 paper. Oh, that's B5 paper. And I looked this up at some point because I'm like, I don't know what A4 means. And so the inch measurements and the centimeter measurements are both fractions or decimals of each other. There's no standard size. It's like, oh, it's A4 or B5 paper, but none of those sizes are exact measurements, which to me seems like a really inferior system. So the big question here is, which is better for artists, metric or imperial? Metric is perfect for smaller measurements, whether that be paint tubes, small distances of space, quick little, that's about 5 centimeters or so, I think. Imperial, for me, I feel like is a much easier system when you're talking about paper and canvas. So cutting, restretching, moving stuff around, framing. I feel like you're going to be able to get a better measurement out of something if you're going by the inch rather than by the centimeter or whatever random letter size you're going to go for. But for artists, regardless of where you are in the world, I think it's probably best to use both. I think there's definitely merits to both systems, and there's definitely downsides to both systems. And depending on where you grew up, it might be hard to transition from one to the other for certain parts of your process. But I think going forward, if you want to, expand your horizons a little bit and maybe make it a little easier on yourself, a little bit of a mix is probably the best choice. And actually, as a quick little example here, at one point I had to scale up a page of my 5x7 sketchbook to a 16x20 canvas, and that ratio just doesn't work. So in my head, to get the math right, I did one side measuring it in inches, and I did the other side measuring it in centimeters, and I was actually able to scale it up by doing it that way. So regardless of where you're watching in the world, have you actually thought about which system you're using and how it affects your workflow? After seeing this video, I'm actually curious if especially some of my international viewers are going to maybe have a look at the Imperial system to see if it actually can help. Or if you live here in the US, maybe it's time to have a look at some metric measurements. I think you might actually find that you can do a lot with them. So, as always, if you learned something or just want to support the channel, go ahead and hit that like button. Get subscribed if you're not already. Consider for supporting on Patreon. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This has been Snipit Studios, and I'll see you guys next time. I just realized I probably have a better thing to say there. I think rather than see you guys next time, it would be fun to say, like, keep on creating. I have to start trying to do that. Hard to change, though. Really hard to change. Especially between metric and imperial.